All right. Well, good morning. I guess officially now. Good afternoon. Happy FSMA Friday to everybody joining us for the June 2019 edition. Very excited to join you all once again, and really excited to see so many new faces. It's cool to see the community continuing to grow. And I think we also have a nice special guest, a returning vet, whom I'll introduce here shortly. And so we're excited to have you all and dig into some things in or around FSMA. So for those of you that might be joining us for the first time, first we want to say thank you for joining us. This is fun for us. This is something we've been doing for a long time, and it really started around FSMA. It makes sense, good name, right? And the idea was to talk about what's happening in FSMA, the reg changes, updates. And then as it's evolved over the years, we've dug more into what are the trends and what are people seeing and what are they hearing from their auditors and regulators, and what are some of the best practices, and we're even evolving beyond that now. And so it's really been a great opportunity to share ideas and strategies and technologies and just information with each other as a community. So and my favorite part about all this is really an opportunity to engage with the experts over at the Atchison Group, and we'll have a chance to do that with our Q&A here at the end. As I mentioned, we started this as a partnership with our partners at the Atchison Group, and it's something we couldn't be more proud of, and really have enjoyed, and we're really grateful for that partnership. As all of you know, they're really the leading experts in food safety consulting out there, and touch a lot of different areas and continue to grow their practice as we've continued to grow our technology really in the same area. And so again, on behalf of TAG, I want to thank all of you for doing this. And if you keep coming, we'll keep putting them on, and we love growing the community with all of you, and hopefully helping everybody along the way a little bit. Agenda-wise, just a couple of housekeeping things. So we try and keep these pretty informal. That's the idea around these, if we were chatting around the table. So ask questions. This is a really great opportunity. We'll monitor those and do our best to get to as many of those as we can. Also notice that you'll see just the panelists. So when you send those questions in, they're coming to us. We'll monitor those a little bit. If they get a little too into the weeds, might be something we have to take offline. But one of the great things is that between us, ourselves at Safetychain and the Atchison Group, we make sure you get the answer one way or the other. That's our commitment to you since you showed up. Main question, we'll get out of the way. Yes, this is being recorded. Yes, we'll be sharing it. If you're not already familiar, we've actually stored an entire library of all FSMA Friday topics, and that's on YouTube or on our website. You can reach it either way. So encourage you, as we get started, you might want to punch on over to YouTube and look up our channel for Safetychain and subscribe, and you'll be able to see the videos as they get added. You can also find them in our resource library as well. And we're on a webinar tool, so if you get a little audio issue, there's two ways to join, with a phone or computer. Usually doing the old switcheroo is the way to alleviate any of those issues. So for today, as usual, we'll do a quick FSMA update, kind of what's new and happening in that world. And then we're going to be digging into, for our focus on environmental monitoring programs, and then we're going to wrap up with some Q&A. So as I hinted earlier, we have a very special guest, a returning vet, and we were giving him a bit of a hard time. Clearly a very popular one, because we had some of you waiting to come into the webinar room quite early. So we're really excited to bring back Dr. Peyman Fatemi, and he's been a part of the FSMA Friday crew for quite some time, but we haven't had him on for a while. So Dr. Fatemi, Peyman, great to have you. I want to make sure you can first hear me okay here.
Yes, thank you, Brian. Good to be with you again.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have you. I think his background goes without saying, with the 20 plus years of experience, both in senior roles and also on the regulatory side, and with the PhD in food safety and technology. Certainly something that's going to help us quite a bit as we talk a little bit more about environmental monitoring today. So really excited to have you back. So with that, if we want to get you warmed up, we're going to stretch you out a little bit here. We're going to start off with some news around FSMA. And if there's anything we know about TAG, you guys are on the cutting edge of this stuff when it comes out. So maybe you could talk us through some of the things you're seeing out there or things we should be aware of.
Thank you, Brian. It's good to be with everybody again, and happy Friday. And yeah, month of June was a busy month for the FDA. They came out with a number of guidances, announcements, and perhaps it's fitting because, you know, the regulations, the implementation dates for a number of requirements have already come and passed, or some are coming up soon. But now they're getting into the development of guidance documents, accreditation of bodies. And the first one is the guidance to help facilities determine their business size under FSMA. And it was really geared towards smaller facilities. And it helps companies determine what is a full-time equivalent. And that guidance provides some calculators based on the number of employees, the full-time equivalent employees and hours worked to determine whether or not you fall under or over that 500 employee threshold to determine what is a small business or otherwise. That includes associated companies and others affiliations that needs to be taken into account as well as part-time workers. So those companies that may still have some questions around that, that is a good guidance for you guys to take a look at. There was also an update to the question and answers to the FSMA frequently asked questions around the produce safety. And it's really based on a number of questions that were submitted to the FDA from a technical advisory network. And, you know, it includes every other aspect from preventive controls, sanitation, all aspects of FSMA, and now includes produce safety as well, including what's a covered produce, what's not. What still doesn't have a lot of information on is around the water requirements that was kind of kicked down the road a little bit more to get a better, for the FDA and the industry to collaborate and come up with a better strategy around that, but certainly provides a lot of information there for folks in the produce safety arena. One of the new areas, and obviously FDA has been aware of the risks with sprouting. It has its own subparts within the guidance, within the regulations, but the production of seeds for sprouting is considered food for the purpose of within FSMA. So there's a guidance document for reducing food safety hazards in the production of seeds that were intended for sprouting. Obviously, not all farmers will know whether or not the seeds are intended for sprouting, but certainly there's a guidance there for them to follow from a good agricultural practices. So I think it's a good one to have. FDA continues to expand its bodies that are certified under the third-party program, and this really goes into help voluntary qualified importer, so VQIP program for those either being required by the FDA or wishing to certify their programs as they want to import into the U.S. I believe there is a domestic and a foreign entity that was certified. So now I think there is six entities that are under the third-party program that can certify a process or product. And then there was a new guidance to help farmers and educators utilize the alternate curricula that was developed by the Produce Safety Alliance for produce safety training. That provides the guidance what that curricula should be, taking into account the land use, the sanitation, employee training, all of the various components that go into the current curricula, but allows them the flexibility to use other alternate curricula as long as they take into account the requirements within the current one. So those are some of the ones that stood out in the month of June. Usually we have one or two updates, but in this case we had 5.
Yeah, it was busy right before summer though. That's unusual, and it's nice to see the guidance. I think it's based on a lot of the questions we see in prior FSMA Fridays. You know, these are the things where people get a little confused, right? So the guidance hopefully is starting to help, but I'm sure applying it, there's still some work to be done there. So So we talked, Peyman, about doing a little conversation this month about environmental monitoring. I know this has definitely been a hot topic and a busy one for you guys at TAG, and I'm sure it's one of those things that's on the mind of a lot of the listeners today. So part of what we were thinking of doing is just talking through some of the common questions that we hear, some things that you all hear out there, and have a little bit of context and some of your thoughts around it. And so maybe starting with the basics, which are just what are some of the environmental control strategies that you see or implement out there in the field?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Brian, and thank you for that. One of the reasons we tend to kind of go back to the environmental control, environmental monitoring questions is that it's something that's needed, and it's something that continues to be one of the struggles in the industry, as the trend is going away from just simply testing the finished product, but rather looking at what are all of the practices that are happening within the facility to help reduce the risk of contamination within that process or a processing environment. Those could be the sanitary design of the facility itself, or the equipment that's being used to process the food, the GMPs. All of that goes into the consideration, and obviously the FDA has very specific guidance and requirements around that. The sanitation program, the efficacy of it, the monitoring of it, the hygienic zoning of the facility from, let's say, ready to eat to the non-ready to eat part of the facility, preventive maintenance that happens, how is it scheduled or as needed, how the facility responds to the corrective actions. Well, consider regulatory compliance and becoming compliant to the regulations. Obviously, supply chain and process control. All of these play a factor in what goes into that facility, how well that facility is being managed. And so some of them may fall as a preventive control, such as sanitation, process control, supply chain. Others could be a prerequisite program, but all of them impact the environment that food is being processed in. And a lot of times, it's not referred to as environmental control strategies because each one of them could fall into a different bucket. But essentially, they're all strategies.
Right.
And so when we look at an environmental monitoring program, we have to look to see how effectively is the program aligned with various strategies that exist. So that's what we really talk about. What are control strategies? They're the strategies the facility employs to reduce the risk of contamination.
That makes sense, and good segue, right, to talk about the why. And you started to touch on this a little bit, and what the role is of that environmental monitoring program, other than some of the obvious things, but maybe you can talk through a little bit of that from your perspective.
Sure. No, that is great. And it's really intended to show that the environmental monitoring program is not a standalone program. It doesn't exist in a silo by itself. It's really there to help answer some of the bigger questions. That all of the environmental control program strategies that we discussed in the previous slide, are they effectively reducing the risk? So that's where the monitoring, and we're talking more than just pathogen testing. We're talking other microbiological indicators, allergens, physical risks, anything that adulterants and increases the risk to the process. What influences them? So the environmental monitoring program, if there is a seasonality to the hazard that's introduced, rainy seasons or otherwise, if there is a change in an event in a facility, traffic, tours, new equipment, these are all influencers that can, or a change in the suppliers that can influence what's coming into the facility and ultimately what potential risk exists. And then obviously the environmental monitoring program has to address what are some of the trends. Is microbiological risk going higher? Is it staying steady? Is it going lower? Which direction is it headed? Are we seeing that the contaminants are going from being tracked to different parts of the facilities? Are there hotspots within the facilities? And what is the facility doing and how effective are those? So, and what else should the company do? Is there intervention technology that the company could implement? Gases phase microbiological treatments, additional sorters, the metal detectors, anything they could do to reduce the risk within that environment. So it should be within the context of these questions that an environmental monitoring program should be built to help answer all of the questions around the efficacy of your environmental control strategy.
That's great and helpful. And I think one of the things I love about FSMA Fridays, not just the insight you guys give, but I think hopefully for the audience, some of these you all know, right? But these are things that if you can slow down and take these away from the session today and apply them to your business, you can start to spot some things. Because I'd imagine for your team, these are a lot of places you start. These are the kind of questions you're asking when you're in a facility with your clients, I'd imagine, right?
It is. It really is. And surprisingly, when we talk to them, yes, there is an environmental monitoring program there. And in many cases, they do understand. But that connection between the two isn't always there. They're not asking, well, we changed sanitation program, we changed chemicals, we trained a new crew, we did something different. They may or may not do additional testing. In most cases, those changes can have a profound impact on the microbiological, chemical, or otherwise risk within the facility. And so the environmental monitoring program, in many cases, isn't changed or modified to see how effectively are those changes influencing the facility. And so I think when we're not going to get into the nuts and bolts of building a program, we've talked about that quite a few times in the past, and we do that with our facilities, with our clients. But the questions that a program should answer should tie in around the effectiveness of those control strategies.
That makes sense. Good point. And you talked about connecting the dots there, and so this is obviously something we see a little bit more from our side as a software provider that helps with some of these things. And so I think, like you said, it's one thing to have the idea, it's another to connect those two. So when you talk about leveraging technologies around the control program and monitoring, like what do you mean by that, and what are any ideas or suggestions you have around that?
No, exactly. And more as we collect the data, and in fact, even the regulators, we'll talk about that later, they want to see how well are you leveraging technologies or analyzing your data that you've collected into improving the conditions within the facility. And that really drives the use of whatever technologies that is best fit for you. Is it around environmental mapping of the facility, putting the dots where the contaminants were found, looking at on the bottom left graphic, showing the flow of the process, where you found it, and then you can track to say, oh, you know what, we need to do something about that entryway from the raw side to the processing side, and then from there to the packaging side. How related are those contaminants? And then, what is the foot traffic? What is the product traffic? And so using technologies that exist, such as what you guys have at Safetychain or others, that you could then leverage and get a better picture and paint a better picture of what is the flow of the potential contaminants and what would be some of the strategies that you need to employ. Others could be around understanding on the bottom right is you have sanitation information, you have environmental monitoring data, analyzing it, graphing it to see, when we clean a facility, we kind of attain a residual level after a good, effective cleaning. It takes some time. We start the process. It could be one day, it could be a week, depending on the process, depending on the type of product, and all of the
Sure.
factors in there. But then at some point, you'll need to do cleaning again. I need to understand when that is. If you do an effective cleaning, you ought to be able to show through data, and this is the data that one of my colleagues put together a while back, to bring the microbial levels, in this case, back to the kind of the residual original level. If it's ineffective, if you do a poor job of cleaning, you'd only bring it down a little bit, and that number quickly goes back up. So it actually reduces the time that you have that you need to go back into cleaning again. So the efficacy of the program needs to be reevaluated. The KPIs are impacted. The operational cost goes up. So it does tie in to actual production efficiency. And so information and the data and the technologies that are out there help companies understand how well are they. And a lot of times the regulators ask them, how do you know that your current sanitation cycle is effective?
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know. I mean, it's a legacy program that has existed, and you know what? It's time to evaluate it. Is the current cycle, if it's more than a day, the right cycle? Maybe you have a room to expand beyond that. But again, these are the type of analysis that needs to be done, and there are technologies out there to help folks make more sense of it. And see, again, we talked about how related are events. Do you see more contaminants when there are issues in the facility? There are maintenance activities, there are rain events, the seasonality of it. Do you see tracking of the contaminants when there are tours and contractor workers? You have a new supplier coming in, or a supply coming in, and with his own unique microbial load, let's say, and how effective. Well, hopefully you've gone through the supply chain program and qualification of the suppliers and all of that, but you still need to know how is that affecting your environment. So that's where technologies really help align the events with the results that you're seeing, so that then you can take action and make corrective actions.
No, that's great. And I'll tell you, one thing I've learned is I've been able to be part of these, and you guys talk a lot about that example you just shared, right? Introducing new suppliers and the risk that creates. So I think that's a great example. I want to touch on one really quick thing here that you mentioned also that we hear from our side is we're talking about a lot of food safety application here, right? And impact. But you mentioned the impact that happens on the operations side. And so for a lot of you, you've been raising your hand or you're shouting from the rooftops and you're not getting the attention or the resources you need. What Peyman mentioned about not only are you solving a food safety or a regulatory or program problem, but there's a real tangible benefit to the production side of the facility. That's a very real ROI, and we don't want to go down that road. But I think we're seeing and hearing more of that as people are connecting the dots between these programs and their technology. And you're spot on with your statement there about the benefits to the production side.
Right.
So I think that's great. You touched on one of our favorite topics here at FSMA Friday. So it just wouldn't be the same if we didn't talk about it through their lens, right? So we all think about these things. What happens when they show up, right? So this is what you see. You're in hundreds of facilities. You get the frantic calls. So what are regulators looking for in this area, or what should we be thinking about from their perspective, or what questions are they likely to ask to challenge you in some of these areas?
That is a great question, and I have to say that regulators are trained to ask the very same questions. How well is your environmental monitoring program effectively verifying the effectiveness of your environmental control strategies? Because the shift from the regulators is more towards environment, and you've seen a number of recalls, number of associations of contamination in the facility with a product out in the market. So that's certainly their focus. And they will take a look at all of the control strategies that we've talked about earlier in the first slide, and how is environmental monitoring program effectively answering the questions that we posed earlier as well. They're looking at it from the very same lens. And my question is, very few products, I would say, yes, you may call a product not ready to eat, but can you think of a reasonable scenario that that product could be used? And if it's still non-ready to eat, but it ends up being contaminated, your brand and your reputation is still at risk. And so, whether or not you classify the product ready to eat, I think it's important to understand that simply calling it non-ready to eat doesn't give somebody a kind of a get out of jail card. No
Right.
pun intended there.
Yeah.
But certainly, so the question is, should you take the same approach even if the product is going to be, unless you're 100% confident that that product, there's no way for it to be consumed without a validated process, I would take the same approach. And they want to take a look at how you're managing the environment as a potential source of the contamination. And as we know, it's been well documented, they're mapping the facilities. They're swabbing your product contact surfaces, your zone 2s, 3s, 4s. And of course, they're using their latest technology, whole genome sequencing, to match with what's known in the database. If there's any clinical isolates out there, any product isolates out there, to see if there's any match, in which case that changes the tone of the conversation. So that's what they do. And the question is, what should the industry do? Certainly from what we talked about, environmental controls and monitoring, this is really, you should be tying your EMP as much as you can to all of the various programs. If there is a issue with the facility, use that environmental monitoring program to show that whether or not a crack in the floor or the wall or in the roof of the facility is a risk or not, and take action and fix it. Should you use the whole genome sequencing? And that's been a debatable topic for a lot of the industry. And there are other technologies out there, may not be quite as high fidelity as the whole genome sequencing, but certainly provides you with enough information out there to determine how related your environmental isolations are. And if you're getting a repeated positives, even without going through whole genome sequencing, that there is something going on there. And if it's a drain, well, it's likely coming from somewhere else. So doing root cause analysis and not just cleaning that drain, but going out and looking at the process, the flow, the people and the product, the traffic, and the design of the equipment and the facility, and what could be causing that. So the industry should really take a similar approach, even if they may not want to do whole genome sequencing, but certainly understand where are the contamination points, how related are they, and more than anything, take action and document it. So that's what regulators do, and I think that's where the sort of the thought from the industry should be as well.
That's excellent. Yeah, and if we can start to create those disciplines internally, then we're ready for those questions, right? We've thought through it.
Right.
So this is perfect. And you're such a pro, right? We're right at the bottom of the hour. One thing we always like to do is be on time. We want to respect, we know how busy all of you are. If you do have some questions, I want to encourage you to send those in. I've got a couple I know that had come up that I had gathered and saved, and I wanted to ask if we have a couple minutes here. And the first is, you started off with that list of strategies. From your perspective at TAG, is there an area where you see the greatest need or the greatest weakness in facilities when you talk about that environmental control strategy?
Environmental control strategies, I think it really needs to be a holistic approach from all of them. Facility sanitary design of the equipment and the facilities tend to be, as the facility gets older, as the equipment gets older and wears out, it potentially, there's a chemical uses, there's just a wear and tear. That tends to be an area that becomes more and more challenging to clean. Sometimes the decision to purchase a facility or an equipment maybe more financially driven and upfront may not have as much involvement from the folks in the food safety side of things. So they may not have quite the same lens that they should have if they had gotten involved, the food safety folks gotten involved. So those tend to be some of the bigger challenges. There is a converted facility, especially if they go from a non-ready-to-eat to a ready-to-eat or raw to ready-to-eat type facility conversion. The flow may not be there. Some prior usage may create challenges. So I think I'll start there. Okay. There's more and more involvement upfront with equipment designers, and there's questions people are asking. But to me, that remains one of the bigger challenges for the facilities because they're more costlier ones to really correct.
Very true. Very true. And certainly if you're thinking of building a facility, maybe something to factor in more than maybe you had in the past. Have a question here. Do aseptic processors need an EMP program?
That's a good question. If the product is being exposed to the environment prior to packaging, and then no further treatment within that package, then yes. When I think of aseptic processes, things could go a couple of different ways. It could be like sort of in-package processing or within a confined housing. So perhaps if you have within that confined housing environment, that area, certainly if there's any level of product exposure, I would certainly look at that and evaluate. It's very process specific. I don't think you can say all yes or no, but if you feel like there is any level of exposure, obviously you're controlling the quality of the air in that environment. If there's level of exposure, then monitoring could take that type of a approach as air and potentially some of the fillers. If the product is being filled in a container that then receives heat treatments or any kind of intervention technology, then the requirements, and that's a validated process, and the requirement kind of goes away from a regulatory perspective. The question then becomes internally whether or not you feel like there is that need.
All right, makes sense. That's good guideline to start with, but like I said, that each one is a little bit different, which is certainly the truth in this industry. So,
right.
So Peyman, thank you. Really appreciate you joining back. It's good to have you. Hopefully we can get you back out here again before too long. If you'd like to connect with him, obviously always encourage everybody to reach out, connect with our presenters on LinkedIn, but obviously one of the great resources we have is the Atchison Group website at atchisongroup.com, and the must-have there definitely is their newsletter, but there's a lot of other great resources, and certainly encourage you to reach out and talk with them about maybe how they can help you in your facility. And likewise, on the other side, we talked a little bit about technology today, and that's where we do our best work. So if you have an area of need in the area of food safety, quality management, helping improve the productivity and profitability of your plant, that's where we can help. And you can see what we're up to over at safetychain.com. And as always, we have our FSMA Friday LinkedIn group. And so I know we don't have time for more questions as they come in. We'll make sure and get those answered there. We also provide the first access to the links and replays and all that fun stuff there. So if you haven't joined us, click on over to LinkedIn and look for the FSMA Fridays group, and we'll get you access. And then we'll be back almost exactly a month from today, July 26th, for our next session. And one of the examples that Peyman shared was around introducing new suppliers. And as I commented, this is an area of passion, I think, for TAG, and a big opportunity for facilities to reduce risk. And we've built this tool together that we're now seeing deployed and getting great results out in the field. It's been really an exciting project to do together. If you haven't seen it or you want to check out a quick demo video, there's a link below there at info.safetychain.com/tag, and you can see the TAG risk assessment tool in action there. And we'd love to share a little bit more about how we're joining forces there to combine their consulting with our technology to do something, I think, pretty innovative and pretty special. So So again, Peyman, thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you. We appreciate the partnership. Good information today, and we'll look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you, Brian. Good to be with you as well.
Excellent. Thank all of you for being here, making the time, and we'll see you next month. Have a great one.